working for candidates or financially supporting candidates, watching Fox News or something, there's always some aspect of trying to change things legislatively by elected people that we feel will better reflect our values and direction for the country. And we have had a successful year. Part of what our PAC does is support people that support agriculture, but also support new people that are coming along that agriculture wants to get to know and get more familiar with. We really appreciate everyone's support throughout the year. We try to expand this on this year to more people. We need to do that. We have a lot of suppliers and other people in the industry that help us on this. But tomorrow, as we know, is the election, so it's kind of like the Super Bowl for political purposes. My wife really gets into that, and she's you can bet on it in England. I think it's what we're going to do here, but it's probably you go on one of the bookmaking sites, and I think the Republicans are the favorite to take the Senate and hold on to the House. And I would have never thought that. 2008, when President Obama was elected, it looked like it was going to be tough to reverse the trend of the House and the Senate, and things changed. We were very proud of it. We were very likely to have politics, something one way, wait a while, it's another way. But all of us are involved because we see so many of the things that can happen to us. One of our big issues now is a lot of the environmental issues that have gone against us and restricted our water. We're all environmentalists, but we feel there should be a more fair balance between fish and people and jobs and privilege going to market. But we've got some real formidable voters out there that are raising money on the other side. And it's important that Western Growers, which has done a terrific job to express our positions. So I'd like to introduce Tom Nassif, our longtime president, and has been one of probably the most politically respected leadership people in the agriculture industry.
Thank you very much, John, and welcome everybody to our PAC luncheon. We thought we would do something a little bit different for this particular luncheon, and in talking to Ruben, with whom I've worked in the past, and actually done some panels together on immigration, they told us about the roadshow they're thinking about doing, and the fact that over many years they have discussed and debated this subject of immigration before. And you recognize probably Michelle Malkin if you ever watch Fox TV. Certainly my wife has. She knows everyone on Fox TV and believes absolutely everything they say. And of course, Ruben Navarrette. I remember from our San Diego days, he was an editorial writer. Now he's a syndicated columnist. They're both expert speakers, debaters, especially on the topic of immigration. They have different perspectives and opinions about it. Michelle, as I understand, thinks the pathway to legal status or citizenship is amnesty, and that forgiving bad behavior just encourages more of it. Ruben thinks that those who are here illegally are never going home voluntarily, and in most cases we would be glad they're staying as they help us grow our economy and replenish our workforce. I very much look forward to this debate. Please look on your tables. There's a pad and a pen. You've got some questions. Write them down and we'll have somebody come by and pick them up, and then as many questions as we can address after the debate is over. I'd be happy to pose those questions to one or both of them to have their answers. So thank you very much, both Michelle and Ruben, for being with us. We look forward to this debate.
Thank you, Tom. It's a great pleasure to be here for lots of different reasons, not the least of which is I was born and raised in the San Joaquin Valley. Now remember that, yeah? Because I feel a little bit, Jack Kennedy once took a trip to Paris with Jacqueline Kennedy, after whom our oldest daughter, my wife and my oldest daughter, are his name. And he said famously, you know, I feel like the man who escorted Jackie Kennedy to Paris. Well, so far this morning, I feel like the man who escorted Michelle Malkin to Las Vegas. Because despite the fact, and we so much look forward to this discussion because it's our goal to make you all feel a little uncomfortable. Like a lot of you, I agree with Michelle Malkin often. I think she's right on Benghazi. I think she's right on the IRS scandal. I think she's contributed so much to the discussion on Obamacare. I think, in fact, she's right on 9 out of 10 issues. Luckily for me, we're here to talk about the 10th issue. And so, like many of you, coming from the San Joaquin Valley, this is where Michelle and I part company on this particular issue. So when the time came to put together this program, I thought, who else do I want to do this with? I couldn't think of anybody better than Michelle Malkin to do this program with. So what we expect here is a nice conversation between two coffee-addicted parents of young children. Two people who like each other and respect each other, but have a tendency to want to take each other's heads off on this issue. So let's set the tone this way, this discussion. And that is the nature of the debate itself. We're going to talk about the 3 major pillars of the immigration debate before we go to your questions. We're going to talk about border security, the guest worker program, which I know is so important to people here in this room, and then lastly, the debate over legal status for up to 11 million people who are here without papers. And then we're going to close it out and go to your questions. But before we get to that, a word about the debate itself. Michelle's been writing a national column since 1999. I've been writing a national column since 2001. In that time, we have written, dare say, maybe hundreds of columns on the immigration debate, and yet the needle hasn't moved. It's the darndest thing when I go around the country. The number one question I get from people is, what is it with this debate? Why is this stuck in the mud? So my question to you is, why do you think this debate, to begin, has been so incredibly dysfunctional? It doesn't go anywhere. It seems to go in circles. All these good folks have written so many checks to their representatives who end up doing nothing in Washington on their behalf. Why is this debate so difficult?
Well, I could write a book about that.
You probably did.
Actually, I did. The first book that I wrote after several years of working in the newspaper industry was a book called Invasion. And I wrote it after the September 11th terrorist attacks and essentially diagnosed a lot of the ills and a lot of the pathologies that create the crisis that we have. And in many cases, government creates these policies that are designed to fail. In terms of the policy debate and political debate and why it is people can't calmly sit across each other and discuss what their agenda is, what their goals are, what the numbers should be, what the failures are, what the consequences of massive, unlimited, unfettered, open borders would be, and whether that's a good thing for America, can be boiled down to a couple of things. And one, I think, is the demagoguery and the poisonous exploitation of the race card. I can't go to a liberal college campus and defend my position that we should have strict immigration enforcement and that, yes, it should be a matter of policy that America puts American workers first and that we should be consistent in our enforcement of immigration without somebody accusing me of being a racist or of being the yellow puppet of the white man, which would really make my poor husband laugh his head off if he knew that I was his puppet.
Right, yeah, I can relate to that.
But But you get into these cable news caricature situations where I'm talking about the ills in the immigration court system, or with detention, or the problems that the Border Patrol and detention and deportation officers face. And Geraldo Rivera's response is to say that the next time I come to New York, he's going to, quote, it's a quote, spit in my face. The idea that somebody who supports strict immigration enforcement, who's fed up with amnesty after amnesty program that simply encourages more illegal immigration is racist, is kind of silly when they have brown skin that is darker than Barack Obama's. And the other thing I think that's important too is the context of the stories that people have, the personal stories that they bring to this debate. And I know that in terms of the sort of confined business interests that many of you have with regard to immigration, it has to be put in a larger context, whether that's national security or whether it's equity issues, not only involving native-born workers, but also the millions of people who have conscientiously chosen to come to this country and whose first act is to follow the law. That was the life story of my parents, who came here from the Philippines in 1970 and who had to learn how to speak English and pay all of their medical fees and pay all of their legal fees before they even set foot into the country. So the idea that it's somehow nativist or xenophobic to take those factors into account when you're talking about protecting the American dream is absolutely ridiculous. Where have I gone wrong?
Well,
I know
we
you're not
are
going to spit on
off
me,
and running.
Ruben, that's why I'm sitting here.
You're right, I'm not going to spit on you. I said earlier, I said, you don't have to worry about me, Michelle, because I'm not Alec Baldwin. For those of you who aren't aware, just in the last 48 hours, she can't help getting into trouble. Alec Baldwin tweeted out through his foundation that there's nobody out there in the media who's more contemptible than Michelle Malkin. So she wears that as a badge of honor. I'm never going to be able to keep up with her. Just when I thought I was the most vilified person in the media, here comes Michelle. So here's where I think Michelle goes wrong. And I got to say, this debate, I've been writing about immigration as Michelle has for so long. It has the miraculous ability of taking otherwise very smart people and present company accepted, having them utter such stupid and dumb things. And what I mean by that is, I have as a dear friend of mine, someone who I've known forever, Ted Cruz. They don't come any smarter than the senator from Texas. Do not engage Ted in a discussion about amnesty. You will see that a lot of that smartness just goes away. And it's very interesting how this works. I've seen that on the part of other people as well. And in this case, I'm talking about the word invasion. I don't like the word invasion for a couple of reasons. If you're a peach farmer in Fresno, or I grew up in Sanger outside Reedley or someplace, and you grow peaches, it's not helpful to the overall immigration debate to have this image of an invasion. When I think of invasion, I think of people who are coming across the border to hurt you, to take over and conquer land, not coming over to approach a peach farmer saying, could I please have a job picking peaches in Sanger, California in July, it's 107 degrees outside, and after we're done at the day, I'm going to be covered in peach fuzz. Now these are good jobs. These are good jobs. These are the jobs Americans are dying to do, don't you know? All those kids at Starbucks, they all love to go to Sanger and pick peaches in the middle of July. So the fact that people are coming across the border not armed with guns, but with farm implements, can I please clean your house? Can I please take care of your kids? Can I please do your lawn for you? To me, the word invasion, while a good soundbite, has not been helpful. I think if you do not have a word like invasion in the debate, you might have had workers on a farm 10 years ago. So I don't think that's helpful. Secondly, open borders. I got it. I'm the son of a cop. My grandfather was a Mexican immigrant from Chihuahua. He came legally during the course of the Mexican Revolution because you didn't come illegally until after the revolution. My dad was a cop. Yeah. There's always a little asterisk there at the bottom. I get mail, I know Michelle does too, from folks who say, my great-great-grandfather came here from Ireland in the 1800s and he came legally. And I thought, oh, I blame it on the public schools. You know, corrupted as they have been by teachers' unions, they're not teaching history anymore. You know, of course he came legally in 1800s. So there's no way to come illegally for so many years later. It's a bit like living in a town with no stoplight and saying, I've never gotten a ticket for running a light. So in any case, open borders. My dad's a cop for 37 years. I get it. I don't want an open border. I want Border Patrol on the border. There's a separate debate there about how much we spend on border security and whether we are in what I think is a really unhealthy model where the more money we spend on border security with walls and fences and border patrolmen, the more we create an incentive for the coyotes to charge more to come across and bring people across. And so the end result is we're fighting an enemy, and every time we strike out against the enemy, we make the enemy stronger. It wasn't that long ago that it would cost $500 to come across the border. Now it costs $3,000 or $4,000. And the coyotes celebrate every time Congress passes a border bill because they can raise their prices. So we're never going to win this battle against the coyotes because we need to think more strategically about how it is we're fighting them. Secondly, the race card, I agree with Michelle, it's overplayed, but there are some people, I say, my phrase is, if the sheep fits, wear it. You know, there are people out there who engage in a very ugly discussion about immigrants where they portray them as inferior. And they portray them as inferior either because they come from Mexico, because their families are bigger, because they're perceived as uneducated. There are a number of people out there, members of Congress and others, Republicans usually, who have used imagery regarding like insects and animals to compare them to dogs and the like. When they had signs back in the day in the Northeast that said in restaurants, no Jews or dogs allowed. And when they had signs in the South, when many of you, when we were all younger then, don't, no N-words or dogs allowed. The image was that these groups were inferior because they were being equated to animals. Well, now, in the debate over immigration, you will often hear Hispanic immigrants referred to with this animal terminology. It's not a good look. It doesn't look good. And so that's where you get this reputation of race being a factor. And lastly, let me just jump to this one. I think that the notion of equity for Native workers, and this is where it gets very interesting. I'm not sure if this impulse is the Republican impulse in me or where it's coming from. But I often will hear from members of the left in Rust Belt states, union members, who feel, as union members, that illegal immigrants are coming in and taking their jobs. And my response is, nobody owed you that job. Nobody guaranteed you that job. Nobody promised you that job. Any one of you who hire people know that those jobs are not the birthright of Americans. There's an idiotic sticker out there, bumper sticker, American jobs for Americans. I don't know what the hell that means. We live in a global economy. Those jobs are up for grabs. And I say this to end this part of the discussion. If you find yourself a low-skilled American worker, US born, you speak English, you were born on this side of the border, you had every advantage, and you're still in the job market getting your butt kicked by an illegal immigrant who doesn't speak the language, who's here illegally and can be deported tomorrow, God help you. How pathetic is that? Now we're off.
The word invasion was not chosen lightly. It comes from the U.S. Constitution. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says it is the obligation of the federal government to protect the states from invasion. And I don't believe that any one of you could find in the work of the Founding Fathers or in their debates any kind of idea that our country was founded to welcome every last willing worker in the world. That is not what a country is about. If you believe in sovereignty, you have to have borders that actually mean something, and you have to be willing to enforce those borders. And at some point, after decades and decades and decades of failed experiments with programs that are, oh, just let's promise there's going to be this grand bargain, we'll give you enforcement, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and then you can have limitless numbers of workers to supply cheap labor. Someday there is going to be a reckoning for all of that. And what will be the price of that? I don't know. This is one of the reasons I wrote Invasion in 2002. Because the price of deliberate immigration non-enforcement was more than 2,000 people dead in New York City and Washington, D.C. and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And if we all agree that we support the American dream, we have to figure out whether we really do believe in a country that has borders or not. And if you don't want that, then be open and honest about it. My question to you, Ruben,
Yes.
is there any country or civilization in the history of the world that has ever survived with open borders, de facto or not? I don't care whether you want to argue about what the definition of that is.
Yeah.
But the idea that we should not put our own people first, and when I say our own people, I'm not just talking about white people, and I know you're not just talking about
Right.
Mexican immigrants and their children and their grandchildren.
Right.
The idea that because Mexico happens to be contiguous with our southern border, and it's been so convenient to allow people to just cross and to have this kabuki theater of enforcement, lends itself to what I think is a very offensive myth. You want to talk about offensive stereotypes of different kinds of immigrants and Native Americans for that matter. I cringe when I hear people laugh at the idea that native-born Americans are not hardworking. I've got lots of neighbors and friends from all across the country who've done hard labor, who have dirt under their fingernails. And you want to talk about any particular one immigration group? There's nothing especially ennobling about people who are coming from south of the border. I have relatives who have cleaned bedpans for a living and have done the hardest work that you can think of, hard labor, who have done what people would consider degrading work, for example. Should we be picky? Should we be discriminating about who gets into this country? Absolutely. I don't think being discriminating is a four-letter word. I think it's essential to our survival.
I agree with you. I think we should be picky. And we should be picky. To my mind, the way you approach the legal immigration discussion is not, as some have suggested, through aptitude tests, so that getting into the United States is like getting into the Ivy League. Rather, it should be based on our labor needs at the moment. And I would agree with you that we've gone too far in terms of family reunification as a standard. And that really, if you need nurses, you should bring in nurses, including places like the Philippines. We do bring in nurses. If we need, we don't bring in engineers if we need nurses. So it should be labor determinant. And we should be picky. We have a right to be picky. And to answer your question, in the overall, I think that no country can survive without borders. And I remember the discussion that I've had just with people from Mexico, starting with Vicente Fox, the former president of Mexico, who doesn't understand or won't admit the hypocrisy of Mexico in terms of Mexico wants a fluid northern border, and on the southern border, it looks like, East Berlin, to keep out people from Guatemala and all of Central America. And there's a double standard there for sure. And I think that we need to have a border system there. I'm not for disbanding the Border Patrol. I am concerned that if you take the number of Border Patrolmen from 20,000 to 40,000, as the Senate bill laid out as a prescription by members of Congress who don't know any better, I think the smartest members of Congress would be the ones who go down to the border. They go down to the border and they just shut up. They don't say anything. They just say to the experts, the guys in the green shirts with the badges and the guns, what do you need and what can I give you? How can I help? But you get down there, they act like they're smarty pants, they end up telling the Border Patrolmen what they need. You need to build a fence here, by the way, I know a company that can do it for you. Ignore the fact that that company also contributes to my campaign. And the end result is, again, from the cop point of view, I'd rather listen to cops and farmers than I would politicians. And I think that we have real border security if we were smarter in the way that we attack this. And what Border Patrol wants, I've come to find out, and I want to give them all of these things, is more technology, because they're really waging a war of wits with the smugglers. They should have like a ComStat program where they can tell you the night before who's crossed where, and they can actually fight that battle against the smugglers to keep people out. They want more roads and paved roads so that they can get to parts of the border. and they want tunnel detection equipment, which interestingly enough is only an issue in San Diego because that's where all the tunnels are. So the Army apparently has it, the military has it, but the Border Patrol wants it, and the Army won't give it to them, and we need tunnel detection equipment. So I say all that, and then inevitably somebody in the back room says, well, you're for an open border. I don't get it. How'd you get from A to Z?
I'll tell you.
Yeah, how is anybody who supports all those things for an open border?
Because Homeland Security and immigration enforcement isn't merely about having a physical border that matters. And here, we're talking about not just the southern border, but the northern border as well, which is often neglected. As I pointed out in Invasion all those years ago, which is still true, there are huge swaths of the northern border that are protected merely by orange rubber cones. There's your great deterrent. But border security also means interior enforcement that matters. And that means if you have to set priorities in terms of enforcement, we live in a world of competing interests and scarce resources. It means taking the between 300,000 and 600,000 absconders and doing something about it so we can send a message that we're actually serious about enforcement. Who are absconders? Well, it wasn't until after September 11th that this term even became known in the public, that there were between 300,000 and 600,000 people who had already been ordered deported. They'd gone through the system. They got multiple bites at the apple.
Right.
Can we all agree that those people should leave because they've been already ordered by an immigration court judge to leave?
I can.
Why don't we start there?
I can do that, yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
And then let's get to things like the backlog of applications of legal immigrant wannabes into this country. Let's send a message to the people who are doing it the right way, that we welcome them, that they are a priority, that we want them here first before people who have forged documents, ignored deportation orders, and, you know, in the worst case scenario, committed much more serious civil violations or crimes.
So let's move to the second part of this discussion, and that's with regard to guest workers. Now, the thing that's been frustrating for lots of people, and we in the media are not part of the solution, we're part of the problem in terms of confusing people and mixing our rhetoric. But I remember during the debate in 2006 and 2007, 2005, 6, and 7, and Lou Dobbs would go on television at CNN and talk about George Bush's amnesty guest worker program. He had taken the two and put them together, amnesty guest worker program. The way most of these people in this audience think of guest workers, they immediately go back to the Bracero program, which was started in I shouldn't know this, but I do, it's the wonky. 1946, ends in 1962, and it goes on for this long period of time, and it basically is an importing of some number of workers, new workers who are not already here. 100,000, 200,000, 400,000, whatever number you want to have, bring them in. And I think what we've gotten confused by is the discussion that you take the 11 million who are already here, and once you legalize them, they in fact become your guest workers, right? That's not how we mean it. So in terms of bringing in a new guest worker program, interestingly enough, it has been labor unions and members of Congress who are Democrats who've been fighting this for the longest time because they don't want that competition. They think they've got into their mind somehow that bringing in workers from another country undermines U.S. workers, and the U.S. workers are members of those unions. So in terms of a guest worker program, is there any guest worker program you would support that would bring in foreign workers from, you pick it, Mexico, Brazil, the Philippines, wherever, some number of them, with regulations that they have to stay as a temporary worker for 1 year or 2 years, and then go back? Would you go along with any part of that?
In theory, it looks great. A temporary guest worker program. But in practice, every kind of temporary, you don't want me to use the word amnesty, but
Not yet.
temporary program results in more illegal immigration. The promise has always been that this would have the opposite effect, right? And I think that politically, it's just going to be an almost impossible sell until this government, I don't care whether it's Republican or Democrat in charge, can prove that they're serious about enforcement. Because you can't sell to people a temporary guest worker program unless you can actually enforce the temporary and guest worker part of it.
Right.
There's been plenty of debate and great economic minds and honest, independent people who have assessed these guest worker programs. And you know, the last great effort at a real solution came during the Jordan Commission, where you had independents like Richard Estrada, who have given voice, I think, to a very deep concern that these are basically programs that keep people in second-class citizenship status. And of course, it resonated with me in his testimony, Richard Estrada's testimony, when he invoked the second-class status of, say, Filipino domestic workers in places like Kuwait. If you really truly welcome and value the labor of people who you're going to employ, whether they're picking fruits and vegetables or delivering them, why not go the full step and offer them, you know, permanent citizenship?
Because your side, if
here?
you do that, your side of the debate will light us all on fire.
No. Not if it is a truly prescribed program. And, you know,
See, I thought the temporary part was the part that makes it more palatable to some folks to say they're going to be here for a short period of time and then they have to go home again. At the end of it all, I'm just trying to solve a labor problem. And I personally want to hear people say there isn't a labor shortage.
But yes, but even there have been, you know, there's been conflicting economic evidence about the numbers and the so-called panics in the late 80s and 90s over you know, the raisin industry or the apple pickers in Washington State. It's not entirely clear, and I think again from a political point of view, because as we sort of after Election Day, this is going to be on the agenda, that at the other end of the economic spectrum with regard to high-tech workers and higher wage workers, there's more and more evidence that yes, those guest worker programs, H-1B programs, are indeed displacing American workers. So it's funny because all of these debates create strange bedfellows. And so when you have people on my side of the aisle who are questioning the massive expansion of these programs on the same side of the aisle as, you know, true blue progressives who are concerned about income inequality, I think this explains the answer to your first question is, why isn't anything being done?
Right.
There are legitimate concerns about the impact on the American worker.
So let's talk about internal enforcement as it relates to employers. Because part of the discussion about guest workers goes back to employers. And it seems to me that the enforcement debate is easy when it comes to the border. Because that's just a conversation of whether you need 10,000, 20,000, or 50,000, or whatever number of people. We can have that conversation. Where it really gets tricky is with the reluctance, I would argue, of both political parties to go forth and enforce employer sanctions against people who knowingly hire. If you look back to the 1986 Berco bill, there's a word in there, you have to knowingly hire undocumented immigrants. There are lots of exceptions to that, but you know, for instance, day workers and others are not, day workers are not included, housekeepers aren't an issue. It's more of a prolonged, you know, I have somebody on payroll for 6 months or something, knowingly hire an undocumented immigrant. And the knowingly has been a problem because people will just say, well, I didn't know. And sometimes in the Bush administration, it got really comical when, let's just pick on the meat packing industry, since we're not talking to a group of meat packers. There was a raid on the Swift company, which was a meat packing company, as you recall, in Colorado, where Michelle now lives, and in other states. And this was the most hysterical thing in the world. The Bush administration did this. They were gonna raid on Friday, so they called the employers on Monday and said, we just want you to know, we'll be on site on Friday to check Social Security cards with your workforce. And on Thursday, the day before the agents showed up, they fired 450 people, right? And so Bush and the Bush folks show up and they look around and say, well, we didn't find any violations. They called them on Monday to tip them off, right? So it creates a kind of cynicism that Politicians don't like picking on employers because they like picking on people, like people like Tom Tancredo and others, who I know you're much more friendly with than I am in Colorado. They like picking on people who don't fight back. And so they like going after undocumented immigrants who don't speak English and can't fight you back. But the idea of going after a powerful farmer in the San Joaquin Valley, suddenly they go soft. They lose their appetite for the fight. So my question to you would be, how do we, if we come to a guest worker program and we have enforcement, how do we walk the minefield of internal enforcement with regard to employers?
Yeah, well, what you and I share, I think, is a common disdain for this toxic alliance of big government and big business and the ways in which they selectively enforce the laws that they pay lip service to. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like people who pick on the little guy because they're afraid of the big guy.
Well, and I don't like big government, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, who pander to business interests. And I think one of the things that is the problem with the Beltway swamp is they don't know how to say no and mean it. And this is what I mean about this larger charade of whether we truly believe in borders that matter and immigration laws that are applied fairly and equally. And when you have any one single business interest that thinks that it should be treated differently than others, this is the mess and the chaos that you create.
Here's where we get to it, though, and I'm glad we arrived at this spot. I have learned a lot about the immigration debate, not from, being at CNN studios in New York or not at Harvard and these places. I learned it from visiting an apple farm up in Yakima, apple orchard, an avocado grove in San Diego County, a pistachio farm up in the Central Valley. And what I see in those places, and I'm anxious to go see more of those places, is farmers who just sort of bring their hands and say, listen, if you want to talk about failure, I'll tell you where the failure has occurred. The failure has occurred not in our government, but in our parenting. Because as parents, we have not raised our kids to want to do these jobs that were done a couple generations ago.
We just disagree on that premise.
And we can disagree on that, but let me complete the thought. When I was at our apple orchard, he said, a generation ago, people would come in summer vacation or winter break after Christmas when they grow apples, and they would pick the apples from the local high school. They don't do that today. And when they do come, they think it's a game. They throw the apple like a three-pointer into the bin. They bruise my apple. They hurt my apple. I have everything invested in these apples because you buy apples with your eyes in the supermarket before you buy them, right? You taste them with your eyes. So I am really empathetic with that farmer and with other farmers like it who say, you know what? It's a fantasy to believe that American kids are ever going to do these jobs like they once did. And that is a failure, not of government, not of Republicans or Democrats. It's a failure of us as parents. So why am I wrong?
It's what you pay people. It's what you pay. You want to get into it?
You're saying that farmers are cheap and they're not paying people enough.
Wages have been artificially low for a long time because of the enjoyment of the consequences of amnesty. It's a fact of life. And the idea that the sort of chicken little alarmism about food prices spiking so high, if we truly enforced our immigration laws, I think is, the kind of hyperbolic language that creates the stasis that we're in now. And if you don't think that people would pay higher prices for strawberries and that somehow that's, that Americans are entitled to cheap strawberries as an international human right, I think it's time to test that proposition then. Because I think that there are always trade-offs. And, my overriding message in all of this is there is a larger context for the need to enforce our borders and enforce our immigration laws. And we saw that after 9/11. And that may seem removed to people who are not anywhere near that and think that these kind of national security and homeland security issues don't touch them. But there are costs to everything. And all of those costs have to be considered as well as the
I'm
benefits.
going to move to the third and final piece of our discussion regarding what you call amnesty and what I prefer to call legal status, earned legal status for the undocumented. But before we do that, just to close that loop on the discussion on employers and what they pay, the avocado farmer that I spoke to was paying, if you're a good avocado picker in San Diego County, you can make $150 a day. And if you're picking apples in Yakima, you can make $15 a day, or $15 an hour. And the reason is because they have to compete with not losing them to the home builder down the street or something. So whenever I get mail from people, and I swear this happened, I got a piece of mail from somebody who said, I'm a US citizen, I know my rights, and I will gladly go pick lettuce in Salinas for $1,000 a week, okay? Now, if you get that person engaged in discussion, you find out they never picked lettuce in their life. The only reason they feel they're justified in asking for $1,000 a week is because they won the lottery of the womb and they were born on the side of the border as a US citizen. So I get frustrated that people have this inflated notion of their worth. How much should we be paying to pick lettuce, or to pick strawberries, or to pick peaches, or to pick avocados? If you say we're not paying them enough, we're not being paid enough, that gets us into a whole discussion where I sound like the Republican and you sound like the liberal Democrat.
That's what makes this, and I don't know what the right wage is, but I do know that a constant supply of so-called temporary labor from south of the border has been something that, I mean, I don't know what you want to call it, but it is a constant supply that really no other industry in this country has. And it is essentially, as the Jordan Commission put it, been in effect public subsidy for the industry. And I have never been for the government picking economic winners and losers. That's essentially industrial policy. That doesn't make me a liberal progressive, that makes me a consistent conservative.
So lastly, the question of legal status. I have gotten into arguments before with no less than someone like Dolores Huerta, the former vice president of the United Farm Workers Union, who does not like me, does not send me Christmas cards.
Neither do I.
There you go. Okay. And we got into an argument because she believes in an unconditional amnesty, and she's almost insulted by the notion that you would ask people to do anything to get legal status. I believe in a long, arduous process where you go from undocumented status to legal status, and not an automatic path to citizenship. You have to walk there your own way. I still, though, get lumped together with folks who are for an amnesty. So my question to you is, what is wrong with providing any number of the 11 million? Maybe 500,000, maybe under the debate over ag jobs, maybe 500,000, a million people or so with legal status if they have been here for more than 10 years, if they have roots in the community, they pay taxes all those years, and if we walk them through this long gauntlet of difficult things, why won't you go along with that?
Well, you've had your way. I mean, in
Doesn't
this
feel like
debate, in this debate, I've lost. I mean, there have been over a dozen of these types of amnesty programs since 1986, and that was always the promise. Well, just give us this amnesty now, and then, I mean, we'll enforce, and that'll be it. It'll be done. But they've come time and time again. And, you know, it wasn't just for people from Mexico. We had a special amnesty for Nicaraguans and Central Americans.
That's true.
And many others between 1986 and last year. And I just think we have to try and draw lines now. And then the problem is that every new amnesty encourages more illegal immigration, and it's time to turn those magnets off.
And from my sense, if you can prove that somebody has endured that kind of hardship, and I think the big hardship that I see with a lot of undocumented immigrants is that they have had to be on this side of the border when they've seen relatives die, mom, dad, grandma die, they can't go back to the funeral. There is a real human toll that's taken place there. It seems like they've paid a due, they did something wrong, they have paid a price for it. It's no picnic being an illegal immigrant in the United States. despite what some folks on your side of the debate say. It's not like they just won the lottery. It's a very vulnerable existence where they can be deported tomorrow and never see their kids again.
We can have an Olympics of heart tugging, okay? Because it is also no picnic to have been waiting in the Philippines for years. And I've got relatives who've been waiting for 11 or 12 years and are punished because they don't live on the border and can just get across. Okay? And that's just one Filipino family. There are people around the world who would literally die to come here, but are made fools of and are called chumps, are treated like chumps because they actually respect our laws.
We're going to end that discussion here. As you can see, this was clearly round one. We're going to have this conversation again around the country. I got to tell you, I so much admire and respect Michelle. She has done great things in the field of media entrepreneurship. I urge you all, in addition to looking at her companies, Hot Air and Twitchy and others, take a look at this new documentary that she's producing that's called The Rocky Mountain Heist, and it's about Colorado politics. She is a new media warrior. I don't know where she gets the time. It must be the coffee that fuels her. But she's terrific. I've enjoyed this discussion. We'll continue it elsewhere. And you can always follow us at michellemalkin.com or rubennavarrette.com. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Well, thank you both for that very scintillating debate. I think we saw some wonderful points being made by both of you. And Michelle, you're very persuasive on an issue where we feel strongly, and we, I'm sure, agree with you on many points other than immigration, possibly, and many might even agree with you on immigration. But when you talk about paying more money, this is something our folks just have to laugh at, because we know that that's the last thing that's going to get us workers. We have paid more wages, and they determine their own wages 90% of the time, because when you have a shortage of labor, they tell you how much money they want you to pay them for them to do that work. And we've had people in strawberry harvest, since you mentioned strawberries, who are being paid $30 an hour average piece rate. And we can't get enough workers to do that work. So, and I've talked to a lot of folks and said, if any of you know of anybody who's not a farm worker who wants to come out and work on the farm, and then after they've worked for a week, just tell us how much they continue to work for. What do you think the right wage would be? They collapse after a day or two. So I'm not sure why people still have the notion that it's a question of how much we pay, when all of our experience tells us the opposite. Question here is, and this one was for Michelle, how do you reconcile U.S. cheap wages and still compete in a global economy? Because as you know, regardless of what we pay, we still have to compete in a global economy. We're not competing with the construction company next door or the restaurant down the street. We're competing with the world. And while the consumer, as you say, is probably willing to pay more money for those strawberries or any other commodity in a supermarket, the question is, will the supermarket buy strawberries from us that's going to cause that increase, or they can go to another country and get that product much cheaper because they don't have the same political pressures we have in the United States?
Yeah, there's no turning back on globalization, and that is obviously a debate that needs a lot more exposure in Washington, not only with regard to low-wage workers, but high-wage workers as well. And you know, for your purposes and for your business interests, I think the problem is when all of this is all lumped into and conflated in comprehensive immigration reform. And that if each one of those things were tackled separately, you probably might be able to make a better case for your industry. But as long as Ruben has identified in terms of a politically intractable problem, people are associating the larger 11 to 30, I say up to 30 million illegal aliens who are in this country, only a small portion of which may be employed in your industry, you're just not going to get anywhere. And I think that there's probably going to be a popular sentiment. Again, this is something that you have to reckon with, that if people have to buy more imported fruits and vegetables, and the trade-off is better enforcement of their immigration laws, that might be something that they would be willing to accept. It seems to me that if you had public referenda, if you put it up to a public referenda, would you pay higher prices if you knew you'd be, for example, safer? Because the public safety and homeland security implications of having that large of an illegal immigrant population where you can't tell who's here for good purposes and just wants to work and who's here for nefarious purposes, if you cannot control that population, people are not going to be able to make that distinction of the kind of workers that you want to bring here and keep here.
Thank you, Michelle. Ruben?
My response to that is,
Actually, I was going to ask you a different question.
well, very quickly, I would say that, I meant to say earlier when Michelle brought up this point, the 19 hijackers who attacked us on 9/11 came to this country legally, on visas, legal visas, on airplanes and not across the US-Mexico border. And so, I'm about to say this not as a Mexican-American and the grandson of a Mexican immigrant, but even for those people out there who are just trying to find workers to work their fields because they live in the real world where they know they can't get US folks to do those jobs, it must be aggravating for all of you to hear your workers equated with the 9/11 hijackers.
And let me explain the nexus of those two.
When we've
okay?
never had a terrorist come across the US-Mexico border.
I detailed in very copious research how each one of those hijackers came over. And when we talk about the homeland security aspect of immigration, this is the intersection of those two things. Because yes, they came here illegally, and largely because our country was pandering to business interests from Saudi Arabia and created a program called Visa Express, where they didn't even vet the applications because it was wealthy Saudi money and Saudi donors that was dictating our foreign policy and our immigration and entrance policy.
Right.
However, how is it that once they came here and overstayed their visas and were here illegally, that they were able to blend into the population and stay here and plot their plot? They got their driver's license from a local DMV in Arlington, Virginia, in the shadow of the Pentagon,
Right.
where illegal alien day laborers were off limits to cops because it was a sanctuary city. Sanctuary policies, illegal alien driver's licenses, all of the magnets that lure people to come here illegally and stay here illegally also benefit people who do not just want to come here and work and raise their families. That's the problem.
Yeah, Ruben, a lot of people will say that there are worker advocates, immigration advocates, that feel it's really important to get people out of the shadows and let them live and work in the light of day. And yet they seem to be unable or unwilling to accept the idea that for the majority of these illegal aliens, what they really want is a work permit, some sort of legal presence in the United
Right.
States,
Right.
and not a pathway to citizenship.
Very good, right. God, that's a very good point. Thanks, Tom. I'll tell you what, this has been one of my frustrations with the folks on the left. Let's just, first of all, say that there are very dishonest and nefarious people in Washington in both parties who have treated this issue like this football for a reason, because it keeps bringing in money from their respective sides. And it's become an industry for the left and an industry for the right. And you have a lot of ineffective people in Washington, members of Congress, who, face it, are not going to leave Congress and go start the next Google. They're not going to split the atom. You know these people, I know these people, they're not very bright. They couldn't make a living in the private sector, they'd starve. So they hold on to their jobs and talking to you, Harry Reid, like grim death, right? And what they have worked out is this deal where Republicans and Democrats together agreed to do nothing on immigration. Because to do something on immigration would really upset the apple cart in their respective bases. And so, to Tom's point, One of the fallacies is this idea that illegal immigrants want citizenship. This is great. Understand this, the debate over citizenship is not about citizenship, it's about voting. It's about voting. It's about the fact that Democrats want more Democratic voters, and Republicans are afraid that they'll have all these Democratic voters who hate Republicans, I would argue with due cause, because some Republicans have earned it. But having said that, nobody's asked the illegal immigrant, and I have. I've interviewed folks who are here, illegal immigrants. I don't call them illegal aliens, I call them illegal immigrants. The left doesn't want me to do that either. They say I should call them undocumented workers, whatever. But the point is,
There are plenty of documents.
yeah, I know. So the point is, in this discussion, I've interviewed them, and they said, you gotta be kidding me. I want a work permit. I want the ability to drive along a town in Phoenix to take my kids to soccer practice and not worry that Sheriff Joe is gonna deport me because he's looking for his next news cycle to be on television again. And I said to them, no, the debate's over citizenship because they want you to vote. And they said, vote for who? We tune into television. You want me to choose between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney? Are you kidding me? I came from Mexico. Those were all bad choices too. So I think we have this disconnect between the debate over citizenship/voting and the work permit issue. And what we should be talking about is work permits. We should find a way to give people work permits and legal status so they can't be deported, but not make them citizens, so they can't vote. They can go the rest of the journey on their own to become a citizen if they want to, but I'm not going to lead them by the hand. And that ticks off both parties, which tells me I think I'm right.